Because After Effects has so many effects that we can actually use, I'm only going to go over a few of the categories and a few of the effects from that category. The categories that I skip over, I'll be going over a little bit later, and so I will eventually get to each of the categories, but for now I'm just going to start with the Adjust category. In the Adjust category, we have most of our color correction tools, and this will change the color and the contrast of our actual image. If you see here, I go to brightness and contrast. By changing these, you can see that I get a brighter picture, and then I can also change the contrast between the dark and light points of the image. And this way I can correct some of the sort of low contrast pictures, or pictures that appear to be too dark or bright. And this brightness and contrast is just one of the types of effects that we can use to get this in the Adjust category. This Hue and Saturation will allow us to actually change you can see here now that the image is more of a green color, and as I go around it'll continue to change hue. And so most of the tools that we would use to change color and the contrast are in this category here. Some of them give us a little more control over our image, and some are used to just automatically adjust an image if we just need a quick fix to it. The Blur and Sharpen category has a number of blurs and a few sharpens. What the blurs are, they all work in a similar manner, and each have a category that's very similar. Let me apply a different blur to this one. And if I turn up the blur radius, you can see how this box blur uses the box in order to blur the outside edges. And if I were to change this one, let's put this one at 50. And this one at 50. You'll notice that they look fairly similar in the way that they blur, but the edges for this box blur are a little sharper, whereas in this Gaussian blur, the corner fades more into the blur than in this box blur. And I'm going to turn these up much higher, and you'll see what I'm talking about. And now at 150, you can see the sharpness of the box area inside, while the outside is much more blurred. And if I were to turn this one up to 150, you can see how this one blurs more evenly from the center. So you have to pay attention to what type of blur you'd be using for the image that you want to create. We also have, let me get rid of this by pressing delete, a Sharpen. And Sharpen won't really work too well on this box image because it's fairly straight and one color. So if I were to select this background image and place the Sharpen on it, you can see how it creates, instead of a blurring, it creates much more of a harsh edge between pixels of a different color. And we can use this if, say, our image appeared a little too blurred, such as this green solid. And if you look here, you can see how it begins to sharpen around the edges between the different sets of pixels. Let me zoom in a little bit and we can see this a little better. But here you can see the amount of the sharpen, and if I turn that off, oops, wrong picture. You can see a small difference in the way that the pixels are being rendered. So it's important to play around with the blur and sharpen of layers depending on what you're trying to get for your image, and how you actually want the blurring to occur, more along the outside, across the whole image, or just a quick pass through in order to mix the pixel colors a little bit better. The channel effects category uses the information that's in our RGB channels in order to create differences in the images. Unlike the adjust category, which uses the entire image, the channel category will select one of the channels to use in order to create an effect. And it's a little difficult to use some of these because so many of them have the same name or similar names, or affect the layer in a similar way. As you can see here, I've applied an invert, and this has taken the image's RGB channels and reversed the actual output of them, so I get this image of the inversion. As you can see here, I can also blend it with the original, and in this manner it's usually using all three channels to create this blend, whereas a normal invert for a single image would look differently blending with its original image. So the channel category, we can go into various points in our image, and you can see how we can play around with the output based on the information that's in those channels. Here I'm using the green channel, here I'm using the blue, and here I'm using the red, and you can see how we can change that output just by the style of just by the selections that we make in our effects in order to use those channels. The distort category will allow us to shift the position of the pixels in the image without actually moving the image itself. Here I'm going to select Spherize, and you can see here that I have my effect point for the sphere. And in this way, you can see the effect that I have of a sort of a mound underneath the image. And by changing its settings, you can see that the pixels move according to the settings that I put into the effect. And you'll notice that I never actually moved the layer. I simply moved the control for the effect itself, and the distortion takes place within the pixels for the layer, depending on what we set in order to create our effect. And there's a number of different effects that we can use in this category, and they all will affect the way that the image appears, either by making it shift its pixels to the side, or just by creating a different type of effect within the pixels of the image itself.